Okay, thank you everyone. Today we're going to be going over ping post for calls. And so very similar to data leads, a lead seller can send partial non-contact information over to a boberdoo system for that ping to be evaluated to see if a resulting call could be sold, much in the same way as data leads. Although because there is a live person on the phone, there are some things that do differ, and we're going to go through those today, both from a process standpoint and from a technical standpoint. So at least in terms of the outline today, we're going to just cover an overview of this process. We'll dig into the vendors pinging into a boberdoo system to start with. So the idea in that use case is a lead seller, which may or may not be a boberdoo client, will ping that partial information into your boberdoo system to have a bid calculated and returned. And then we're going to look at the other side of the coin, which is selling to partners dynamically, which would be then pinging that partner system to see if they can take it and some of the things that they may also return in that response. We'll talk a little bit about duration, which is super important when we are talking about ping post for calls, since that can vary. And then we'll take a look in the leads tab at what this looks like, and then finally end with a very specific case called EPL, or earnings per call, when you have dynamic vendors and fixed price partners. So we'll come back and reference this throughout, but I'm going to go ahead and jump in with this process of ping post for calls. So we are going to start with the technical side of things. And so the idea here is that for a boberdoo system, instead of 2 steps, there are 3 steps when we're talking about ping post for call. There is the ping phase, which would be the same as a data lead. There is the post phase, which also would be very similar to a data post. And in these cases, we are just talking about data. And then finally, the sending of the actual call to the boberdoo system. So when we come back and look at the ping phase, one of the things that is different that should be called out is the API action. So ultimately, this is going to be communicating with your Twilio account for that number of purchases. So the API action does differ from ping post lead, which is what you're most likely used to using if you're doing ping post in a data lead type. So when we're talking about ping, it's the same thing. We're going to have things like the mode, the type, return best price, same as with a data lead that is required, both as a source setting and then also in terms of having that vendor include that field. And then finally would be any IVR filters. So geo is a big one, being able to ping the zip code, since the zip code or the geo of a lead may often differ from the area code of that phone number. Your system by default will use the the area code to populate the state field. But if your vendor pings in a zip code, we can automatically populate state. And then also, if they were to populate city and state, we will obviously take those values. So we have an example request here. In terms of the response, it's going to be the same as a data lead, matched, meaning that you're going to bid on that lead, price being included, and then the lead ID. Or unmatched, meaning that you do not have any partners when your system evaluates that ping. So now only upon a matched response would a vendor then continue to the post phase. Again, there is some differences here. So in the post phase of a data lead, you will often see matched and unmatched as well. And here you are going to see success as the affirmative response, telling the system to telling your vendor to continue on with the phone call. And so then finally, you're going to have the third step, which is for that vendor to call the terminating phone that you order in your boberdoo system. And so that would then ultimately be connecting the lead to your boberdoo number, which then would match that call to whoever that ping post scenario was matched to. We can take a look at ordering the phone number. There is a wizard for it, so it is fairly easy to get through. And then the important thing there would be your vendor has to post the lead's phone number in the origin phone. So that is going to be then what is used to use in routing and delivering to your lead buyers. So we're going to take a look at the vendors and the use case of the vendors pinging the lead into your system using these specs here. We're going to be poking around Brett's system today, and Brett's going to show us a postman example. So I'm going to pass the screen over to him in a second. As soon as I allow him to share and unmute him.
There we are. Hello, thank you.
All right. So in the case, before we get to that postman example, when we are looking at setting it up, as I mentioned, in the phone routing tab, you do have a phone wizard that at the current time does not produce the PDF like the data lead. That is going to be in our next release, but still allow you to go through the steps of setting up a campaign, a source, tracking source for that vendor, and ultimately ordering that phone number. Little pro tip here, if you are dealing with a ping post vendor, you should be dealing with local numbers because they are cheaper both on a monthly and a per minute cost. So no reason to spend the extra money if you are not marketing that number directly on a web property. So in this case, just use the local number. So Brett, when you're ready, I'll pass it over to you to show the postman example.
Perfect, there we go. So yeah, just like Scott was saying, in regular ping post for data leads, the same idea is used for phone calls. And the way to think of it is kind of this API is a hybrid of a phone call API and the ping post API. And the end result, though, it allows the vendor to submit extra data with the phone call. If you think about a phone call, the only information that comes through is the number that they're calling from, the number they dial into, and then if there's an IVR where they're actually manually selecting information, that's the only information that's really transmitted with a raw phone call. This setup allows all that extra information that's needed to be submitted before the phone call is actually transferred. And so this may be tracking variables like a sub ID or a pub ID, or it may be actual filterable fields like zip code or legal category. This example that we're going through is a legal vertical example. The same thing can be applied to any lead type, insurances, home services, you name it. If it could be ping post for a regular lead type, it could be ping post for a phone call. And so, just like we have with our regular ping post, there's options if there needs to be dynamic pricing or there needs to be static pricing, right? And so if they need to be dynamic pricing, meaning you want to return a bid back to your seller, back to your vendor, in this example, they would include return best price equals 1. And this then includes the price value that you're willing to pay that vendor for. So you can see here, if I uncheck this and I send it, there's no price included. You have to have this return best price that tells the boberdoo system to return that price in the response. So if after I include it, now again, we see that same or a different price now. Similarly, Scott mentioned the duration being an important part because it can vary. If you include return minimum duration as a field, now you'll see if we send this, there'll be an extra node here determining how many successful minutes are required for a call to be sold for $75. So that can be played then into the vendor then in their decision of whether they want to then send the post. So step one, we do the ping. We get back matched with a price offer. Let's say I'm the vendor. I accept this bid. I then will then go to send the post part of it. Here in the ping, there's no contact information. Now, though, in the post, when we go to see what's in this one, we'll put the lead ID value in here. But below, we'll see all of the actual information. So the lead's phone number, their name, their address, their email. This would be any other information you're collecting as well that you want to then use with the lead or deliver to the buyer can then be submitted on the post. If we then send this, it will return back either an error or success. Success means that at this moment in time, this offer is kind of locked in, right? And so the phone call is now the third step that the system needs to complete the whole process. And that is the actual, like I said, phone call transfer. So if we were to dial from the phone number, from this phone number, the lead's phone number, into the terminating phone, which is the boberdoo phone number, the number you order from your Twilio account, that then will have the call show up in the system. But since we did these extra steps at the beginning, it makes then have the phone call contain all of the information that we submitted beforehand. So the end result is always the call coming through and being transferred, but the ping post setup allows additional information to be used as well as dynamic bidding and dynamic durations. But I would say the most important part for ping post is filtering, right? As I said at the beginning, it was only limited information that comes through with the phone call. Well, someone wants to be able to filter by the legal category, right? There's no way to know the person's legal category unless it's coming through a ping post, because that's not collected on a regular phone call. Again, unless there was the IVR. So now if we go back into the lead system, if I go to the leads page for inbound phone, just at a quick glance, when you're on the phone call page, the default view that we see here is always the raw phone calls that have come through. The data portion, the data submissions that come can be found by using and filtering by pings only, or you can do pings and posts to see that kind of the full run of all of them. And so here then we can see a kind of full run of the pings and post that have come through for this particular day that we're filtering by. The best place to know what's happening for any leads, not only the leads for phone calls, but leads for regular leads as well, is always the lead log icon here. So each lead has its own little icon. It looks like a notepad. If you click that, you'll get some more insight as to, what happened with the leads. And so clicking this lead, I get a pop-up that reads through, and this will show you then who then on the buyer side was then pinged and what their responses were back. So we pinged this John buyer. They said, yep, it was a success. Here's the phone number to transfer the call to. Here's the billable duration, and here's my price offer. Just like in ping post for data leads, we capture the dynamic price, but in addition, we capture the dynamic duration and optionally can capture the dynamic transfer number to then be used. So in this case, there's two buyers. One returned back a price of $75. One returned back a price of $65. System saw 75 is greater than 65, determines they were the best offer for that call. So the logs kind of work very similar to how you may already be familiar, but with phone calls, it's a little bit more inclusive since there can be the ping post logs as well as the matched buyer logs as well. So looking at one that actually sold, right? Click that same icon. We can see what happened here. So Same idea, ping 2 buyers, 65 versus 75. Found 75 was the best one. The call went to that buyer with this phone number. The call lasted 0.3 minutes, which was higher than the 0.17, 10.2 seconds duration from the minimum duration here. And so that call is successfully sold. The other option would be here, or the other status that you might see for leads will be the declined option. So if we click on the lead log for anything that's declined, these are generally ones that did not reach that minimum call time. So opening up any decline, the very first log at the top will see call lasted 0.32 minutes. It's less than 1.25. And we undo the sale at that point.
All right.
Yep, Scott, if you want to go ahead and take that back.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brett. Options. All right, so Brett brought up a couple of things in the use case, duration, and then another one that often comes up with calls. So first off, in the examples that Brett went through, in the postman example, you saw the response was returned in minutes. In the example in the lead log, the response from the partner was returned in seconds. And so your boberdoo system has the ability to respond to your vendor in either minutes or seconds, but it is a switch and the default is minutes. So that's important for you to know. If you want that to be seconds, we can make changes. Just jump on there and with a ticket or chat, we can handle that for you. But it is important because we have had clients put 120 in either the filter set or as far as like the response, thinking it was seconds, when in return it was returning 120-minute duration. Obviously, not a lot of calls are going to last that full 2 hours. So in order to keep your billing accurate, you'll definitely want to understand the duration, both in the response back to the vendor and the response from any of your partners. The second thing to talk about is the maximum time between the ping and the post. Now, when you're talking about data leads, typically that doesn't matter all that much because, the ping comes in, systems are evaluating, and they may do a third-party call here or there, but you're evaluating leads in seconds, and then the post is going to the winner. When you are talking about ping post for calls, depending on the vendors that you're working with, we've seen cases where a call center may ping the lead to make sure that the call they're about to make can be sold. That ping then comes in and locks up that scenario. So we do have a maximum time that we allow for the post to come in before we kill that ping scenario. And that makes sense, right? You do not want, let's say you have a partner with a call concurrency of 1 and they can get 2 calls a day. If their ping scenario is locked up with a 1 from 1 call center, you could not send them any calls for the whole day. So the default, I believe, is 60 seconds, or sorry, the default for that is 300 seconds, but it is something that we can change. So if you have a use case where you have call centers that are pinging in and then need more time before they send that post because they're going through the whole qualification process with that lead, not a problem. We can make that system adjustment for you specifically. Okay, so now we're going to move on to selling to partners dynamically. Brett did give us a little teaser on that. Just to go back to the trusty infographic, what we are talking about in this step here is step 2. So after your call, whether it's a ping, whether it's a full post, whether it's a raw call coming in, your system will exclude any of your partners that cannot take that call at that point in time, and then build typically a best price scenario coming in. Now, if you have buyers that are paying a fixed price, $10 for a call, that would be in the lead price of the filter set, just like it is now. So in this case here, an inbound phone filter set up at $55. But you can also set them up as a dynamic buyer. So in this case here, when a dynamic buyer is a potential match, we ping them the partial information. So that might be something that you get pinged in from a vendor, but it may be something that you have a phone number on a web property and you build an IVR to ask the caller, enter your zip code and press 1 for auto accident and 2 for bankruptcy and so on and so forth. That information is collected as data, just like that data being pinged in from a vendor. So that data can then be pinged out to any dynamic buyers that you have, and then their bid would be considered relative to any fixed price buyers that you have set up right now, just like a data lead. Now, that's kind of the best price, but the important thing is that with a dynamic buyer, duration is ignored. So the system is set up to sell the lead based on the best price. So if you are selling to multiple dynamic buyers with multiple dynamic durations being returned, we have done custom distribution logic calculations for clients before, because it is not just a simple clear-cut decision on where to send a lead. A lot of times there will be some equation where we discount based off of the duration that's included. And so that's a good example of a custom project that we could engage with you if you're interested. But it is important we are taking that best price and using that in the decision logic. So we're going to jump over to the filter set here and cover that with a dynamic buyer. So the filter sets, you may notice will look very similar to the data leads. You can have fake ping price or fake post price. Your margin calculation, if you are arbitraging pings from vendors and they reside in the filter set, would also be here. So those will work very similar to the last webinar that we gave, when we talked about how to utilize fixed, variable, scheduled, and AI adjuster for different use cases. You're going to have that ring too, and then ultimately, when we're looking at setting this up, it is going to be set up very similar to a dynamic buyer in data leads, in that you will typically put minimal restrictions on what you're going to ping them. So, things like minimum number of minutes for a successful call would be defaulted to 0. The ring timeout, when you are talking about a ping post buyer, will typically be set to no timeout, since if they return to bid, you're going to typically just sell them that lead regardless. And then you can do things like set your sources, and the delivery setup then is going to be based off of the specs that your partner or your buyer give you. So very similar to how we've talked about differences in the boberdoo's ping post specs for calls, you're going to get different specs from vendors. So right now, Brett's doing a great job of helping our clients, since it is in kind of at the early adopters, both in terms of building these specs for your vendors, but we have been building the vast majority of the deliveries for dynamic buyers, so we have a lot of experience in those realms. Some things to note are not all lead systems require a post. We do require a post because it is confirmation that that call is coming, and again, we talked about those max timeouts. But there are systems that just lock up that scenario, I guess theoretically forever. And so you do not have to send a post in before you send a call. And again, those are things that are specific based off of who you are selling that call to. All right, so we're going to jump over to the leads tab. I know Brett introduced it a little bit. Some things that you'll notice when I go to the inbound phone tab is that my layout looks a little bit different than Brett's, especially when you get into calls or ping posts for calls where there's lots of different fields. I would bring up the column priority configuration as something that is user specific and a great help so that you can organize this data so that it makes sense based off of the information that you want to pull from it. So when I'm looking at my inbound phone and the way I have it organized, I can kind of tell based off of the zip code of whether or not there has been any data associated with it because of the use case in this test system. So then looking, I know that there are some cases where it is just a call coming in as opposed to the data coming in ahead of that call. So when we're on this page here, you saw both on Brett's and mine, the highest bidder, some additional columns. Those are nice for call routing because you can see whether a call is going to match to one or more than one partner as it relates to that ring timeout. So when we're getting in here, and it is primarily about ping posts for calls, but we do have more clients that are doing a full post of data into the inbound phone lead type, using that to match and then send the call. The process, as Brett said, is really just the same as the ping post, just using a different mode. And it is something that Brett touched on. This default view, when you just go to the leads tab, is going to be the end results. So these are going to be the calls that came into the system. If you have situations where your vendors are submitting data ahead of the call and you don't see it on that leads tab, search for pings and posts. Since even if it is a full post, it will only show up in the pings and posts since it is incomplete information as it relates to a lead. So this would be, if you do get into the data with the calls, is a good one to then save as a template so that you can easily select them from here because you'll be looking at those multiple times throughout the day. The other things is that I would say you hear boberdoo stress testing. I could spend the last 25 minutes just talking about why it is important and how important it is for you to test. In very few places is it more important than with calls, especially calls with data. You have huge variance in terms of software processes coming from different call centers or different marketing systems. So there's more variance coming in than when we're talking about data. You have timing. So I can't tell you how many call centers will send the call, then post the data, and then wonder why the data and the call are not together in the system as one complete lead. So cadence is important. The data has to be submitted before the call coming in. So things like that, typically if you're bringing on a new vendor, I would say start with one small geo, very small daily lead limit, and run it for a few days. One success does not equal a campaign that is live and troubleshooted. While that's not the case typically in data leads, it's a lot more the case than when we are talking about calls here. So that's definitely a ramp up. And when you're selling calls dynamically, I think it's also important to start small and confirm after the first X leads, 3, 5 leads, or at the end of each day for a couple of days in a row, just to make sure that all of the data is posting over correctly, as well as coming into your system correctly. So the reason for that is when you look at the specs, is that some of those things that would be used to match the filter set, the easy example being zip code to establish the proper geo, those are not required for the lead type like they are in a data lead. And the reason is, of course, because you may just order a phone number, put that on a landing page that is targeting auto accident people in California. So you know all the resulting calls are going to match a certain partner, a certain campaign. So they are not required to technically to route a call through the system. But if you want them in a ping post environment, they do have to be present. So some troubleshooting things when you're getting launched or expanding that use case that you should consider. It does cause frustration for some people if we've had clients that do one test, zip 9999, then they go live and have buyers asking why they're not getting their 30 calls that were promised on day one. I think the ramp up is very important here. So that's the end of my my soapbox part of it. When we're looking at the leads tab, the last thing I want to talk about, and we've talked a lot about searching for pings and posts. I mentioned how the cadence submitting the data in before the call is important. What I have found, or what we have found, is if you have a use case with a specific phone number, in many cases, we're starting in the lead search and delete to figure out where that is. When you're looking at the calls here, if you search by pings and posts for that origin phone number, it will also pull up those data submissions that included that, let's say in a full post example. So that'll align those. You can see, for example, here, hey, the call came in before the data came in at all. So these things will help you in troubleshooting any use cases in the system. Okay, so the last thing, and this is a little bit less to do with ping post for calls, but in the case where you have vendors pinging in calls to your system and you have fixed price buyers only. So when that ping comes in and your partners here all have a lead price in the filter set, we have a distribution logic called EPL, earnings per lead, or expected earnings per call. Ultimately, it is a way to optimize your call routing based off of your expected earnings when you factor in things like duration, refunds, and the like. So what it is essentially the system, when we are looking at matching more than one partner and determining the order, we are going to look at the attempts, and you can set the denominator there for how many attempts. We're going to look at the total revenue or total successful sales dollars divided by the number of attempts. And that is going to be the metric that is used to sort these three relative to each other. So for example, if Grace is paying $30 for a call but has no duration, Brett is paying $50 for a call but has a 1-minute duration. When the call comes in, let's say over the past 100 calls, Brett has only had 50% of them meet that 1-minute duration. His effective or earnings per call would be 25. So when that call came in, we would use 30, and then we would carve out any margin that's associated with Grace at 30 to return that bid back to the vendor, as opposed to using 50 from Brett, knowing that half of those are not going to convert to anything. So again, that is a very specific use case, but